About our first speaker, Scott Klusendorf is the founder and the president of the Life Training Institute, which equips pro-life advocates to more effectively defend their views in the public square. He's also the author of The Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture. Scott has taught pro-life apologetics at over 80 colleges and universities, including not so conservative friendly Stanford and Berkeley. His topic for our opening session, the issue of abortion. Please welcome Scott Klusendorf.
Perfect. Thank you, Monty. It's good to be with you. I don't know how it is in your family, but in our family, when you graduate high school, Dad does not buy you a car. Dad will contribute toward an experience, but I won't buy you things. But I love to buy my kids experiences. And one of the ways I do that is I cash in frequent flyer miles and say, okay, where do you want to go? And Dad and graduate take a trip. Well, when my oldest son, Jeffrey, graduated high school, I didn't even have to think about where we were going. I reserved the tickets even before I talked to him because I knew where he wanted to go. He wanted to go to the beaches of Normandy, France. Specifically, he wanted to be there where on D-Day, the U.S. and Allied forces began the invasion of Europe to free it from the clutches of Adolf Hitler. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, but if you did, you know what happened on D-Day. Our troops, our first wave of Army Rangers, sustained 80% casualties, and here's why. Number one, the tide charts were mistaken. Our guys were told they were going to get dropped into water that was shoulder depth. It was 35 to 40 feet deep. The guys are carrying 100-pound packs of weaponry. Most of them go straight to the bottom and drown before they even get a shot off. The few that managed to not drown survived by ditching their weaponry, but now they had a challenge. They had to run across a beach with no weapons with which to engage the enemy while they're taking fire from the front and the sides. And if you saw the first 35, 40 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, you know what the carnage was like on that beach. It was unbelievable. And as you walk into that American cemetery and you see all those white crosses, you better prepare yourself. You will be undone looking at all those crosses. And we walked into that cemetery and no one was speaking, but my son Jeff whispered to me, Dad, let's go down to the beach and let's wade out into the water and then let's walk back toward the beach the way our guys would have that day. I mean, it was an unbelievable father-son moment. And we're standing out there in the tide, and the French tour guide is yelling at us in French, come on, you're holding up our whole group. I'm like, hey, babe, we saved your butts in this war. We're staying right here, and we're going to enjoy this father-son moment. Thank you very much. But men and women, as I was standing there on that beach at Normandy, at Omaha Beach, I was struck with a helpless feeling of what it would be like to not have what you need to engage. And for many of you today, you may feel, here I am in a state with a governor who is sworn to oppose everything I hold dear, and the culture lined up against us, and you feel outgunned and in way over your head, and you're wondering, how can I, where I'm at, make a difference on such hostile turf? And I want to talk to you today about how you can make a case for life on hostile turf. And that matters to you because it's very tempting to want to give up and think, there's nothing I can do here. Let's move to Florida. The beaches are better. The governor is more articulate and more with it. Let's get out of here. But I'm going to encourage you to stay and fight, but not stay and fight without any weapons to engage, but with the tools of thought you need to fight the battle and engage your neighbors. And dare I even say some of our church members who don't understand this issue the way they need to. So today we're going to help you do that. And I want to begin by giving you the three most important words in defending your pro-life view. And you may want to write these down. The three most important words. Word number one, syllogism. Some of you are going, wait a minute, I haven't had enough coffee yet today to get that deep. What on earth are you talking about? A syllogism is simply a formal argument, a couple of premises followed by a conclusion. Here's a syllogism. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. See how you got a couple of premises and a conclusion? Pro-lifers have a syllogism, and here's what I'm going to tell you, men and women. If you don't stick to your syllogism like glue, if you're not tethered to that very tightly, when you try to discuss abortion with people, they will constantly change the subject on you. How many of you who have been married at least 20 years have ever had a dispute with your spouse? You were winning. Every rational mind in the universe knew you were winning. The Lord knew you were winning. And your spouse changed the subject on you. Can I see your hands? Look at all these people. Now, how many of you that have your hand up, put them back up. How many of you, when you were losing, you changed the subject? Let's see how many hands stay up. Boy, a whole bunch of people. This whole side of the room needs to get saved right here. Listen, we are all prone to change the subject, aren't we, when we aren't having the better of a discussion? The people you're going to talk to on abortion are going to do the very same thing. And if you don't stay tethered to your argument, you're going to chase bunny trails all day long. So we want to make sure you understand that pro-life syllogism, which I'll give you in just a minute. Second most important word, you may want to write this down, syllogism. Anybody want to guess what the third one's going to be? You're all prophets. Syllogism, that's correct. Say it out loud with me. Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. All right. Honey, what'd they talk about today? Syllogism. I didn't know you spoke in tongues, dear. Yeah, well, we're going to define what that is. Here is your pro-life syllogism, and it's very straightforward. Premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore abortion is wrong. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. Now let me tell you something about that syllogism. There is only two ways you can defeat it. You can defeat it by showing the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises, meaning the argument is invalid, or you can defeat it by proving one or more of the premises is false. Outside of that, your argument stands. It does no good to say, well, you're a man. There goes your whole argument. I'm tempted to say in today's culture, well, how do you know that I'm a man? I mean, that's kind of risky in today's world, isn't it? In the Caitlyn Jenner culture we are part of now, how do you know my pronouns? How dare you presume things? But don't do that. But the point is, your argument, men or women, stands or falls on its merits, not your gender. Your argument is valid or invalid, sound or unsound. It also doesn't work to call your argument religious. Arguments are not religious. They are sound or unsound, valid or invalid. You can't defeat it by simply calling the argument a name the way a certain governor we will not mention often does. What you have to do is do the hard work of refuting it. And if you stick to your formal argument that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings, abortion does that, therefore it's wrong, you can politely say to the people you're talking to, can I just make an observation? I made an argument. I noticed you didn't engage my argument. You just called me names. I want to be open-minded, and if my argument is bad, I want to fix it, but you're not helping me if you just insult me. And you actually call them out on what they're trying to do, which is to change the subject on you. Don't let them change the subject. Keep the main thing the main thing. That's how you survive on hostile turf. Got to keep the main thing the main thing. And I have some good news for you today. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to be an effective pro-life defender. You don't even have to have a graduate degree or even a high school degree. But you do need to be clear on three questions that we're going to look at in this session. And if you have clarity on these three questions, you can make a difference where God has placed you. One other thing I want to say to you. A lot of people give up before they ever hit that beach because they think to themselves, how am I going to memorize answers to every objection that's thrown at me? You don't need to. Your job, men and women, is not to close the deal on the spot. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but ask yourself this question. How many people have you won to the Lord in your evangelistic efforts? I know the answer because the number for you is the same one for me. Precisely 0, because it's God who's in the business of saving people. Your job is to be a faithful ambassador to Him. And you know what? I think my friend Greg Kokel puts it real well. Our primary job description is to put pebbles in people's shoes. You ever had a pebble in your shoe when you're out hiking? It wears on you and wears on you till you stop to deal with it. Your job is to give people something to think about. And here are 3 questions that will help you give them something to think about on the issue of abortion. Question number 1, we're going to look at the issue, what is the unborn? And I'll explain why that's so essential. Question number 2, we need to be clear on what makes us valuable as human beings. And question number 3, we need to be clear on what our duty is. If you've got clarity on those 3, you can make a difference where God has placed you, and you can make a difference even on hostile turf, like where you find yourself in northern Illinois today. So let's look at that first question. What is the unborn? I want you to do a little thought experiment with me. I want you to imagine you were at your kitchen sink washing dishes one night after supper, and as you're scrubbing away, getting all the food off the plates, your 5-year-old son or grandson comes into the room behind you, into the kitchen, and with your back turned says to you, Daddy or Mommy or Grandpa or Grandma, can I kill this? Some of you are going, oh, cute little boys would never ask that question. May I enlighten you? This ring on my finger means I've been married to the most glorious woman in all of Christendom for 38 years. We have a son 32, we have a son 30, we have a son 26, and a daughter 22. I have personally heard the question, Daddy, can I kill this, more times than you can imagine, always with his hands around his brother's neck when he's asking it. I am not teaching a parenting seminar today, just so you know. When you hear that little pipsqueak say, Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this? What's the very first question you need to have answered? What is it? Cockroach or snail, do whatever you want with it. Do not show your mom or sister. Neighbor kitty, whoa. Brother by the neck, call the pastor, you have issues, right? You would never in a billion years say, sure, son, have at it, till you answered the question, what is it he's got? You know what we just did? We just solved the abortion issue. Can we kill the unborn? You know what your answer should be? Yes. If. If what? If the unborn are not human. If abortion does not intentionally kill an innocent human being, there's no reason to oppose it whatsoever. But you know what the problem is in our culture today? People don't want to answer that question, what is the unborn? So you get Governor Pritzker talking about we need to celebrate reproductive freedom, and that reproductive freedom is, quote, good for everyone, unquote. Governor, I have a question for you. With all due respect to your office, does everyone include the unborn? Is reproductive health care, by which he means abortion, good for the unborn? No, it's not, is it? He just assumed the unborn aren't human. He didn't argue for it. He just assumes it. It's like the tax man knocking at your door and saying, when did you start cheating on your taxes? And you protest and say, I don't cheat. He says, that's not what I asked you. When did you start? And you protest, and he won't take any answer other than yes or no when you started. And you think, this is unfair. It's stacked against me. And you're right, it is. The tax man is assuming what he's trying to prove without evidence. And people do this with abortion all the time. I said I wasn't going to get political in this session, and I won't. But I'll just say that the current president of the United States, who I will not name except he goes by the initials Joe Biden, said basically the same thing on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. He says, ours should be a culture that welcomes the advancement of health care for women. What does he mean by health care? He means abortion. Mr. President, does women include women in the womb? No, he only assumes, he doesn't argue for it, that the unborn don't count. And this is what you have to challenge as a pro-life advocate. You cannot let that assumption go. Let me ask you this. Would anybody you know argue for choice in who decides if we were talking about killing 5-year-olds? Never in a million years. You know why they talk that way on abortion? Because they assume the unborn aren't human like that 5-year-old. Or they talk about how we should trust people to make their own personal decisions. Would any of you argue that way if we were talking about killing teenagers? Some of you are going, wait a minute, on that one, let's have a discussion. Folks, this is a pro-life conference, in case you're wondering, so we won't be doing any of that. No, they only argue that way with the unborn. Why? Because they're assuming the unborn aren't human. You cannot let that assumption go unchallenged. You've got to force your critics to answer the question, what is the unborn, before they assume we can just go ahead and kill them. And too often, pro-lifers don't challenge that. Well, I'm not going to assume an answer to the question, what is the unborn? I'm going to answer it for you. What is the unborn? Here's your answer in a sentence. A distinct, living, and whole member of the human family, even though that entity has yet to grow and develop fully. From the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. Everybody hold out your hand like this for a moment. Give yourself a good pinch on the back of your hand. Those of you that were lying about changing the subject on your spouse, this is your punishment. Give yourself a good pinch. Congratulations, you just sent a couple of hundred somatic cells hurling to their deaths on the lap in front of you. I have more bad news for you. Each one of those cells you just sent to their demise individually contains your entire DNA encoding. Did you just commit mass murder? For those of you worried, I'm in trouble. You did not, and here's why, and I think you know why. These cells on the back of your hand are merely part of a larger human being, you. They are not distinct whole human beings the way you were at the embryonic stage, the way I was at the embryonic stage. There's a difference in kind between these cells that are merely part of a larger human being and you as a whole living member of the human family, even at the one cell stage. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but how do I explain this? Because people say to me all the time, that early embryo doesn't even look like a baby. And they're right, it doesn't. Have you ever seen a picture of an early embryo at the 10-day stage, for example? You need a microscope to see it. And it looks like just a ball of cells. And people rightly say, that's not a baby. And they're right, it's not a baby. But it is a human being at the earliest stages of development. And sometimes our intuitions can be mistaken. And let me give you an example that might help clarify what I'm getting at. For those of you in the room that are under the age of 40, I need to give you some distressing information. There was a time in life when we did not take pictures with our phones. We had these things called cameras, and cameras were rectangular, and you'd shoot the picture, the round lens would open up, and the shutter would let light in, and it would record images on this stuff called film. Film was very expensive. We most certainly did not waste it taking pictures of our food. And by the way, just so you know, if you're a dude and you're on social media and you post some picture of a dainty little plate that looks really cute with microscopic portions of food on it, I unfriend you. It better be an In-N-Out burger or a rack of ribs or we're done, all right? But the way it would work for those of you under the age of 40, after you shot 36 exposures, you would very carefully remove the film from your camera, put it in this little tiny plastic container with a lid on it that never quite worked right. You would try to snap the lid shut, and then you would drive your pictures to this little yellow and white booth in the far corner of your neighborhood supermarket called Photomat. You would drop the pictures off. You would wait a month and a half for them to come back. Half of them overexposed. How many of you know I'm preaching gospel truth right now? Yeah, you young ones look around the room. I'm not kidding. We suffered back then. Well, the Polaroid camera, of course, was the antidote to this. And if you had one, you didn't have to wait a month and a half to get your pics. You would shoot your picture. It would spit the picture out. Some of you are doing the muscle memory on me right now. You'd shake it for 2 minutes, and then your picture would gradually emerge. Let's pretend that we dismiss this conference right now, and we go straight to O'Hare, and we get on a flight that takes us down to Mexico, where we're going to go on a Mexican safari. We're going to go deep into the jungles of Mexico. And to borrow an example from philosopher Richard Stith, you have a Polaroid camera, and you are at the front of our safari, and you just had something amazing happen. With your Polaroid camera, you shot a picture of a black jaguar midair in the trail in front of us. Now, if you know anything about black jaguars, you know they're almost never filmed in the wild. You not only got him in the wild, you caught him midair. And you're trembling with anticipation, knowing National Geographic is going to pay you huge bucks for that pic. But while you're waiting for it, I come up behind you, I rip the camera out of your hand, and while you're waiting for the picture to emerge, I rip the paper out of it, and I tear up your photo. Are you angry at me? You will kill me even if you are pro-life, right? What if I glibly say, what's the big deal? There was no jaguar there. All I saw was a white paper with a brown square on it. You would look at me with your eyes on fire, and here's your exact words to me. Are you out of your mind, dude? The jaguar in that picture was already there. We just couldn't see him yet because he was still developing. Men and women from the one-cell stage, you were already there. We just couldn't see you because you were still developing. That's the science of embryology. Now, that's pretty straightforward, but why is it then someone like your current governor doesn't get this? And here's why. We're part of a culture that thinks moral truth claims are like ice cream. You have your preference and I have mine. And just like I shouldn't judge you for liking chocolate over vanilla, so you shouldn't judge me and my moral choices. Have you seen this bumper sticker? Don't like abortion? Finish it for me. Don't have one. When pro-lifers say abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being, we are not making a preference or subjective claim. We're making an objective claim about what's right or wrong regardless of preferences. Pardon me, just went through puberty. What happens in the culture is people hear you say abortion is wrong, and you know what they think up here? Oh, you just don't like abortion. But we're not arguing that abortion is wrong because we dislike it. We're arguing it's wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being. How do we persuade people and reach them when they've reduced abortion to an issue of mere preference? Answer, we give them a chance to view what's actually at stake in this debate. How many of you saw the movie The Passion of the Christ? Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, Band of Brothers series, Hacksaw Ridge. We're at about 100% of this auditorium that paid money to go watch gruesome imagery on the screen. Why did you do it? For the same reason I did. You knew that those images conveyed truths that no words could ever convey. And men and women, there are large numbers of our fellow citizens that will never be persuaded that abortion is wrong with a capital W until they see it. In just a minute, I'm going to roll for you a very short clip. It's 55 seconds, and you do not have to watch it. This 55-second clip I'm about to show you does not show an abortion procedure, but it shows the aftermath. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because it conveys truth words alone can't. And you may choose not to watch, and let me tell you how you can avoid its contents, by simply looking away. There's no narration. We've taken it out of the clip so that if you wish not to watch, you can avoid its contents, and I invite you to exercise that right. Parents, I don't think there's children here under the age of 7th grade, but if there are, would you kindly just put your arm around your child and encourage them to look down during this brief presentation, and then they can rejoin as soon as the clip is over. I want to say one other thing before we roll this clip. There are men and women listening to me now, as there is in every audience I talk to, who for you, this topic today is taking tremendous courage for you to be here, because for you, abortion is personal. And I don't know if I'm talking to men who encouraged a woman to abort or a woman who chose that because you thought you didn't have another avenue out. But I want you to know the reason I'm not here to condemn you, the reason nobody here is going to condemn you, is because we are committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that gospel, men and women, we sang about just a moment ago when we talked about the wrath of God being satisfied. Here is the gospel. The gospel is not that God just sweeps our sin under a rug. He can't do that if he's holy. If he is a holy God, he has to punish sin. And guess what? He did. He took a substitute, Jesus, who comes to earth, who willingly bears in his body the visitation of God's wrath and judgment for our sin. Every one of us in this room is a rebel against our Creator. We've got a rap sheet a mile long just from today. And it's not just that we do bad things, it's that the Bible says we're bad by nature. We are in our very constitution, we have a sinful nature that is in rebellion against its Creator. And God would have been perfectly just to save no one. Have you ever thought about that? That if God just said, I'm done with this race, he would have been within his justice to make that decree and be done with it. But instead he sends Jesus, who stands in our place condemned, bearing the judgment of God for sin that every one of us here today should be bearing. And the good news of the gospel is, if your trust is in Jesus alone for your salvation, God the Father is no longer your judge. He is your heavenly Father, and you get adopted into his family. Why? not because of anything you've done. Let's be clear on that. There isn't anything you do that makes you right with God. Your good deeds won't make up for your bad ones. But God sent his substitute, and because Jesus stood in your place condemned and not only lived the life of perfect obedience you and I have not, but bore in full the judgment of God against our sin, God looks at Jesus and judges us on the merits of Christ, not our own righteousness. So that means that if your trust is in Jesus today, your sin has been absorbed by Jesus, and you are declared righteous. You're not made righteous, but you're declared righteous because of what Jesus did standing in your place condemned. That's the gospel. And God proved that his sacrifice on our behalf was sufficient because he raised Jesus from the dead 3 days later. So I say to you, if you've had an experience with abortion, you don't need an excuse. You need what everybody in this room needs in exchange: Christ's righteousness for your sinfulness. Let's keep that good news of the gospel in mind as we take a minute to watch this film. Again, if you wish to look away, you go ahead and do so. We'll go ahead and roll it right now. Some of you might look at a clip like this and think, oh man, do we really have to be this provocative to make our point? And I'm understanding of people who see this and think, oh man, that's just gut-wrenching. I agree, it is, and I don't like these pictures any more than you do. But I'm reminded of many historical examples of imagery changing people who didn't want to change on an issue. I don't know how many of you have visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., but if you have, you may recall that you start up on the third level, and you kind of wind your way down through the exhibit. The first thing you're confronted with as you arrive there is this metal engraving of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe in World War II, sitting in the front seat of a Jeep with a pale, sickened look on his face. There's a story behind that engraving, and here it is. Eisenhower, either through ignorance or just being too busy, did not really think that the death camps were all that big a deal. But he had a Jewish aide who badgered him to go look at one of the death camps. And finally, Eisenhower, losing patience with this aide, said, fine, I'll go look at one of your bleepity-bleep camps, but I need you to leave me alone after that. So Eisenhower gets in the Jeep with the aide. The aide drives him out to Ohrdorf, a recently liberated camp, and a notoriously bad one. And Eisenhower gets out of the Jeep, and he's immediately overwhelmed by the stench of the place. He ducks into a couple of the vacated bungalows that were there. He then goes into a third building, and when he emerges from that one, he ducks behind another building where he threw up for about 20 minutes. And after finishing throwing up for 20 minutes, he came back to that Jewish aide, and he grabbed the guy by the shoulder and said, I want you to get every American company commander on the phone within 50 miles of this place. I'm told the American soldier doesn't know what he's fighting for. When he sees this, he'll know what he's fighting against. What changed the Supreme Allied Commander? Seeing evil when he didn't want to see it. We wonder why, as I'll talk about in a little while, why many of our leaders in the church don't discuss abortion. A pastor who is not brokenhearted over abortion will not risk the flack he's going to take for preaching on it. You have got to break people's hearts on this issue before you change how they think and ultimately behave. That's why we use imagery. I show this clip when I speak in Catholic and Protestant high schools, Christian worldview forums, and it does more work in 55 seconds than I could do in an hour merely talking. because the images convey truth that words alone often cannot. Second question we need to be clear on is what makes us valuable. In just a moment, don't do it yet, in just a moment I'm going to have you look around the room and stare at some people. If you're a single dude and you think there might be some nice-looking young women here today that you'd like to make eye contact with, this will be your God-sanctified moment to do it. If you're married, I trust you know where to look. If not, we will have counseling for you during the lunch hour. 1, 2, 3, go. Stare at some people. Give them the eye. Some of you are having way too much fun at this. By the way, don't laugh. I met my wife this way, 38 years, baby. All right, look back this way. I have a question for you. What makes us equal? Are we all equal physically? That's right, because I can tell you at age 62, I cannot play basketball the way I could when I was 22. And as I look at this auditorium, I can tell there's a lot of you here that would absolutely clean me out on the basketball court one-on-one right now. But men and women, if Planned Parenthood is right, that we can destroy a human fetus because its development does not match our own, if development is what gives us value, and you have more of it than me, then you have a greater right to life than me, and human equality is out the window. Are we all equal in terms of our self-awareness at this moment? How many of you drank coffee before coming into this auditorium? The elect are now raising their hands. All right. If you did, your synapses are firing on all cylinders right now. You're following this talk without any trouble at all. If you did not have coffee and you drank that stuff that comes from, I don't know where, called decaf, and you had a high-carb breakfast, you're this side of comatose right now. But men and women, if Peter Singer, the ethicist at Princeton University, is correct, that we can not only dismember a living human fetus, but kill a newborn because neither is self-aware, and he's right, neither is. If self-awareness is what gives you equality and value and a right to life, and you have more of it than me, then you have a greater right to life than me, and human equality is out the window. There is one thing we share equally as you stared around the room, and it doesn't come in degrees, and it's not something that comes and goes in the course of your lifetime. You don't gain it, lose it, get a little more of it, get a little less of it. You have it from the moment you begin to exist. And that one thing we all share equally, here comes another big word, we all share the same human nature, which if you're a Christian knows bears the image of God. Some of you are going, wait a minute, syllogism was bad enough. What do you mean by nature? What does that mean? All living things have natures that determine the kind of thing they are. Any of you have goldfish here? Raise your hands. What kind of nature does your goldfish have? This is a really tough question. A goldfish nature. How many of you have dogs? What kind of nature does your dog have? This is really tough. A canine or dog nature. How many of you have cats? What kind of nature does your cat have? Satanic nature. Yeah, that's right. You're a human being. What kind of nature do you have? Human being. When did you get your human nature? The moment you began to exist. Now, you might get pushback on this. Somebody might say to you, oh, wait, I get it that you have a human nature, but not that embryo at the 10-cell stage. Here's the question you need to put to them. How is it possible for two human parents to create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? To quote the great philosopher Ricky Ricardo, they have some splaining to do at that point. How is it even possible for humans to create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? Make them answer that. It's not enough for them to dismiss it with a wave of the hand. There are differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, but men and women, don't let them get away by merely pointing out that there are differences. That's not good enough. They got to go a step further and argue why those differences matter in the first place. It's not enough to cite a difference. Make them argue for it. Here's the mistake pro-lifers often make. You make your pro-life case and somebody says, well, that embryo's not even self-aware yet. And right away, the pro-lifer buys the premise of the objection, and they say this, why, that embryo has brain waves by week 6, and by week 12 can dream in the womb. And they think they've refuted the argument. No, you just bought the premise that somehow self-awareness or cognitive ability is what gives us a right to life. Challenge it. Say, how self-aware do I have to be not to be killed? And why is self-awareness decisive and not something else, like maybe having a belly button that points out rather than in? Make them do the hard work of defending their claim. If I claim there's a pink elephant swinging from the exit sign back there, 3 of you just looked and it was the right thing to do. Who bears the burden of proof, you or me? I made the claim, I bear the burden of proof. When somebody says we can discount the unborn because they're different from us, make them explain why that difference matters. Don't let them get away with merely citing a difference. Here are the 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, and none of them are good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. There's a difference of size, a difference of level of development, there's a difference of environment, meaning where you're located, and a difference of degree of dependency. Think of the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D, and you can remember those 4 differences. By the way, some of you are taking notes right now faster than broke people at a Dave Ramsey seminar, and I want you to know that you can get what I'm telling you at the books I have available. All right. Here are the 4 differences. Let's show you why they don't matter. Size, there's your S in the SLED acronym I just gave you. You were smaller as an embryo, but since when does body size determine your value? Men are generally larger than women. Do men deserve more rights than women simply because they're larger? If you're a dude doing this right now, I now know why you will be single for now into eternity. Body size does not equal value. We do not think that Shaquille O'Neal, the former basketball center, 7 foot 2 inches tall, who played with my beloved Lakers for a number of years, is more human and valuable than all of us because he's a foot taller. Body size doesn't equal value. What about your level of development? You were less developed as an embryo. You know what your answer should be when people say that? Why, that embryo isn't even developed yet. Your answer should be what it was when you were a teenager and your mom and dad said something you didn't like. So, why does that matter? I want you to bring that word "so" back into your vocabulary. How does development determine what I am or what my value is? 2-year-old girls are less developed than 21-year-old young women. 2-year-old girls do not have a developed reproductive system yet. Are they less human and valuable than the 21-year-old who does? I speak to a lot of teenagers in high schools, and I often say to them, as I did recently at one school with 800 Catholic students up in the bleachers in the gym, I said, you are less developed than your parents. You're less developed than your parents physically, and you're less developed than your parents intellectually, which came as a complete shock to all of them. But the reality is you don't reach your intellectual peak till your mid-40s. Do mom and dad have a greater right to life than you simply because they're more developed? By the way, this is exactly the point Lincoln would make when he would debate proponents of slavery. Lincoln's opponents would say, that slave differs from us, Mr. Lincoln. And Lincoln would say, yeah, he does, but that's the wrong question. The question is not, does he differ from us, but does he differ from us in ways that justify enslaving him? And to quote Lincoln directly, here's what he said. You say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then? The fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man? Take care. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it's not skin color, it's a matter of intelligence. The white man you wrongly allege has superior intellect to the dark man. Take care yet again, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. Oh, you say it's not intellect, it's not skin color, it's a matter of interest. The white man has it in his interest to enslave the dark man. Take care yet again, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person that can make it his interest to enslave you. Do you see what Lincoln did here? The very arguments that were being used to disqualify the unborn worked equally well for people, disqualify the slave worked equally well for white people. Peter Singer at Princeton is right. The very arguments that Planned Parenthood uses to disqualify the unborn work equally well to kill infants and toddlers. At least Singer is consistent. He argues no newborn should be considered a person until 30 days after birth, and disabled infants can be killed on the spot by the attending physician. Why? Because newborns, like fetuses, are not self-aware. They're not persons. There's no individual there yet to kill. At least he's consistent. Planned Parenthood wants to draw this arbitrary line at birth, and Singer looks right at him and says, you can't do that. Your own arguments go way further than you want them to, and at least he's consistent, though he is barbaric. Size, level of development. What about environment, where you're located? Where you are does not determine what you are. If you drove at least 17 miles to come to this conference today, raise your hand. This is impressive. 27 miles. 37 miles. We're starting to get serious now. All right, 57 miles. 77 miles. 807 miles. I win. All right. Now, if a journey of 77 miles does not change you from one kind of thing to another, how does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing we can kill to a valuable human being that we can't? And the answer is, if you weren't already human and valuable, changing your address isn't going to do it for you. Finally, degree of dependency. Yeah, you depended on your mother for survival. You know what your answer should be? So, why does that matter? How does it follow that because I depend on someone, they can slit my throat? Make them answer that question. I hope I get their names right here, but there are 2 twin young women that the press has followed since infancy. I think they're called the Henschel twins, Abigail and Brittany. And you look at these 2 young women, they're conjoined twins. There's 1 set of legs, and from the waist up, 2 body trunks, 2 shoulders, 2 heads. And if you look at them, you can tell that there's no way to separate them without killing both of them because they share vital organs. But men and women, if it's true you can be killed because you depend on another human being, neither one of those girls has a right to life. Both can be killed because, after all, if dependency is what makes us valuable, they don't have it. If the ability to live independent of someone else is what gives us our right to life, neither one of those young women have that ability, and yet we would consider it appalling to kill them. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. Let's end with this question. What's our duty? And I'm going to give it to you in a sentence, men and women. It is to love our unborn neighbor, and that entails defending him even on hostile turf. And I know that's not easy in a culture like ours. And all of us here are going to have to make up our minds. Do we care more about defending truth for our king than we do what the culture thinks around us? You will not be popular if you're pro-life. You're going to take heat for it. But you're going to have to make that decision. And if we understand love biblically, love is not an emotion biblically. It's a behavior. It's what we do even when we don't feel like it that really counts as love. Think about the Good Samaritan. He not only felt pity for the beating victim, he took pity on the beating victim, even though he had to go way out of his way to do it. And Jesus said, there's what it means to love. Now, I understand in our flesh we can never love perfectly, but we can all do better at loving our unborn neighbor, even if it is costly. I know for many of you, you've seen that movie I mentioned earlier, Schindler's List. One of the concluding scenes in that movie just takes my breath away every time I watch it. And I watch it now and then just to refresh myself about why I'm in this fight and why I'm willing to take heat for being in this fight. Oskar Schindler is a man in the movie who uses his own money to buy people off the death camp lists. And he goes to the Nazi commanders and says, don't gas these people. I'll buy them from you. I'll give you money in exchange for them, and I'll put them to work in my factory. And he managed to do that for over 1,000 of these Jews. And as the movie is drawing to a conclusion, there's this unbelievable scene, which many of you will remember, where Oskar Schindler is saying goodbye to the people that he's ransomed with his own money. The war has ended. He's going to leave in his car, and the people are going to go their ways. And he gathers with them outside his factory in this night scene. And he takes the hand of the Jewish commander, and the Jewish commander thanks him for all he's done. And Oskar gives a very surprising response to the Jewish commander. He says, you know, I didn't do enough. I could have got more out, and I didn't. I wasted so much money. You have no idea how much money I threw away. And the leader of the Jewish people says, Oskar, look around. There's 1,100 of us alive because of what you did today. And Oskar will have none of it. He says, I could have got more out, and I didn't do it. And he looks at his car that's about to whisk him away, and he says, my car, why did I keep this car? They would have given me 10 more people for this car, but I kept it. Why? And then he rips this pen off his jacket, a decorative pen. He says, I kept this pen, 2 more right here. I could have got more out, and I didn't do it. And the scene ends with him collapsed behind his vehicle, weeping profusely. I didn't do enough. And this from a man, men and women, who took his own resources to buy people off the death camp list. I realize you got it hard here in Illinois. I realize you're on hostile turf, but here's the question we all have to ask ourselves, red state or blue. Are we taking our Holocaust as seriously as that man took his? Because if we are, it's not enough for us to just feel pro-life sentiment. We have to behave like we love the unborn. That means sacrificially supporting organizations like this one. It means sacrificially supporting our local pregnancy centers that are helping women make the right decisions. It means looking for students that need to be trained on how to defend their pro-life view and sending them to places where they can learn to do that. It's going to take sacrifice to win this culture war. It's not going to happen by us just feeling bad about it. We have to love behaviorally. And that's what I hope you will do here today. That's the purpose of today, to help us all be courageous and standing firm even on hostile turf. God bless you as you do that.
Right. Mr. Klusendorf, couple questions real quick.
Absolutely.
All right, we are going to take short questions, not speeches or commentary, okay? You had a question, sir.
What do we do about church organizations that are not pro-life?
You mean basically all of them? Sorry, forgive the snark. The answer is, again, if we do not change how people feel about abortion, it's very difficult to change how they think and ultimately behave. And I'm a living proof of this. I was an associate pastor in Southern California, and at age 30, the local pregnancy center director started bugging me to get involved. And I would be very polite and, just kind of say, oh, yeah, that's nice. And I'd show up at her banquet once a year, give an obligatory $100 and go home and think, I'm done. I did my pro-life duty. And finally, she just kept after me. By the way, there's an argument here for persistence. It works. And she kept after me, and she said, I want you to come to a pastor's breakfast that we're doing next Saturday. You're going to like the speaker. He's a former member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He wrote the bill there that cut off tax funding for abortion. He's a lawyer. He's intelligent. I promise you he won't hurt the brain to listen to. And I went, and honestly, I'd been turned off by some pro-life speakers who I thought didn't do a very good job defending their view. This guy did. He stood up. It was Greg Cunningham, Center for Bioethical Reform. He laid out a case for the pro-life view, but then, men and women, he did something that fundamentally changed my life. He showed an 8-minute video like the one you saw. I sat there and I wept profusely, and here's why. I thought, I am no different than the priest and the Levite who passed by on the other side of the road. I say I care about this issue, but I'm not lifting a finger to stop it. And I went home that day and I took the VHS tape he showed. VHS tapes were these rectangular things that some of you may remember. And I showed that to my wife and I said, honey, I feel like my whole world's just been rocked. And 6 months later, with the blessing of the church where I was an associate pastor, I left to pursue how I could train pro-life Christians to make a case for the pro-life view. What changed me? Seeing those images. Because when a pastor is more brokenhearted over abortion than he is terrified about preaching on it, he will preach. But if he's not more brokenhearted, he's not going to take the flack he might get for preaching on it. So the answer is our leaders need to be brokenhearted over this issue.
Sir, you had a question.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. It seems like in the last 2 elections, abortion has been a huge issue, and it just doesn't seem like even pro-life politicians cannot make an argument that is persuasive to people. Are you involved with talking with politicians that are pro-life and helping them to be able to persuasively make their argument for pro-life?
I have at some level. Here is the soundbite I wish every pro-life politician would make. It's very short. It takes 7 seconds to deliver. And by the way, that's about all you're going to get on the evening news, so you better make it count. Here's the soundbite they need to give. Go back to our syllogism. What they need to say is this: I oppose abortion because it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Period, stop, rinse, repeat 1,000,000 times. Do not let them take you down other trails. And people get in trouble when they start then letting the media say, what about this? What about that? As I said a moment ago, I oppose abortion because it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Just keep repeating that. I don't care how angry they get at you. It's clear, it conveys the force of our argument, and it avoids rabbit trails and traps.
All right. Thank you, Scott Klusendorf.
Thank
Let's
you.
thank him.